Last time we looked at the EaganMatrix Karplus basic library preset and how it implements the Karplus-Strong pluck string algorithm. As I noted, you can do a lot just with this simple preset in the building blocks category. Now let's take that preset and use it as a building block to add a bit of our own identity to it. We'll also look a bit more into what changing the individual parameters in the algorithm can do. I've made a number of modifications and additions to the Karplus basic preset that allows me to get a very wide range of guitar-like sounds out of it. Let's take a look at some of the ways you can create your own pluck sounds from this great preset that we'll use as a template for experimentation. So here I brought up the Karplus basic preset, and this is doing exactly what we talked about last time, with the one addition that Christoph, after he creates a burst of sound, like we talked about, and sends it into the voice delay, that's sent into a high-pass filter set at 1 Hz cutoff frequency, and then from there, that's set into the low-pass filter. So he's basically cleaning up a bit of that very, very low frequency sound before things go through this loop. Other than that, it's exactly what we talked about last time. Now in this, you can see there's only one barrel. The only thing we can do is play with the cutoff frequency parameter here. And if we set this to its minimum, nothing comes out. And if we just add a little bit on there, you can hear it's a duller kind of a sound and very soft. As we bring this in, we're going to get louder. And about halfway, and you can hear it's getting kind of brighter as we go up here. But that's all you can do with this preset. But it was meant as a building block. It was meant to take and do things to it. So let's bring up what I've done. And you can see I've added a number of things here. But basically, in the background, it's still the Karplus basic algorithm, only I've changed a lot of things where you can see almost every parameter in here can be changed to create some kind of difference in the sound. We still have the original algorithm present here. We have the burst of sound into the voice delay that gets sent into the high-pass filter, then into the low-pass filter in the control loop, and some of that is sent to output, just like before. But the main change I made was to take some of this sound and also throw it into a big bank, the biquadratic bank of filters. Don't be afraid of this thing. It's one of the major additions to the EaganMatrix, something you really won't find in many other sound applications. I've also taken the output from the Karplus-Strong algorithm and I've duplicated it on a second single pole low pass filter, but this time I use cascade of 2 instead of the original cascade of 4, and I throw that into the big bank as well. Here you can see it's coming in on filter bank 2, and that's what I've assigned this to. So I have a more complex sound going into this big bank, and then I can control it with the parameter section down here, and this allows me to get a much greater range of sounds out of this than I could with the original that just modifies the cutoff of the low pass filter itself. So I've kept the original barrel, I've renamed it dull to bright, and that's controlling the cutoff frequency of both of my single pole filters that I've created here. And we can play with that a bit. Let's see. It still goes from that dull to bright sound. But now you see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra controls here that I'm going to use to change the sound in various ways. One thing I kept from the last video is this attack parameter that goes from long to short. What this did, if you recall, is it puts a formula on the input to the voice delay. So instead of just sending a unity value into that control loop, it's letting you change it a bit. And basically, it's going to subtract, based on barrel 3, up to 0.08 from this. So it's just going to take a little bit off, but a little bit goes a long way in this case. So if I play a note, I'm holding it down now, and that's going through that control loop, and it will gradually fade away. But if I play with this attack, I can make that fade away much quicker. To a point where it's fading away quite rapidly. Now, I'd use this if I really don't want that extra sustain component coming in. The next thing I did was take a gen and use that to control the cutoff frequency of the initial filter that burst of noise is being sent into before it goes into the control loop. I set that gen with an initial offset of 1 going up to 11 if I set the gen to its max here. So that's going to control the cutoff from 1 kilohertz up to 11 kilohertz. And obviously, at the lowest setting, my cutoff for the low-pass filter is only 1 kilohertz, so not much is going to get through. But if I open that up so that now it's a low-pass cutoff of 11 kilohertz, a lot more high-frequency component is going to get through. So now let's look at what I did to add a little dynamic control to the bit bank, which is really the main output from the preset. The first parameter is the frequency in kilohertz for the first bandpass filter in this bank of filters. I've used X as the default value for that, but I've offset it with another gen that will allow me to basically control frequency content. Now this goes from a value of 0.3 to 2.8, and that'll be a multiplier times X. Why those values? I just played around with them, and those are values that seem to give me a nice response. So let's take that all the way down and play something. That's at the lowest value of 0.3. Now let me bring that to the highest value. And what this is again doing is it's changing in kilohertz that first bank of filters. So basically it's going to allow more high frequency content to come through. Much different sound, right? And I can play with this in combination with my tone. Pretty nice guitar sound, actually. The next thing I did was add a parameter to the bandpass bandwidth spread. Now here 0 means each bandpass filter in the bank has the same bandwidth, and greater than 1 means the bandpass filters farther from the center have increased bandwidth. And I really didn't change the center or the amplitude spread parameters because I found they didn't really change the sound that much based on what I was doing here. But changing the bandpass bandwidth spread does change things a bit. When you set it low, you get a much greater amplification of the sound. And if I take that up, a little more nuance maybe when it goes higher up. But I found it was nice to have as a control. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't need it. I found that for some settings, especially when you go down on the dull side and take the highs off a bit, it really can. It really can help get a nice kind of thuddy kind of sound. There you can hear. If I change it, I don't have quite the dynamic force that I had with it low. Same nice timbre. Everything I've done so far actually takes effect on the lower 2/3 of Y. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to bring some kind of distortion-like effect in above that. So here I created a lot of formulas that are Y controlled. The main one is a change in the output gain. Here, up to 2/3 of Y, I just multiply it by unity, so it's the original output I had. But then I use this square root formula from that point up to increase the gain up to 3.7. And that, I've found, gives me an acceptable distortion in gain. Too much more and it just gets totally out of control. But you can experiment with things like that. Now also what I did was I have a little Y control after 2/3 of Y on both the recirculator dial control and the convolution output wet to dry mix. So basically I'm going to bring in a lot more reverb as well on that distortion when I play above the 2/3 of Y mark. I found that it just sounds better with that reverb on the distortion. Finally, a couple more things I did is I slightly decreased the bandwidth of the Big Bank after 2/3 of Y. Now I can't decrease it too much because if I do that, it's totally going to distort and everything will go to hell, possibly including my speakers. And finally, I add a little bit of Y change as well to the frequency spread of the Big Bank. All those things in combination give me that kind of distorted sound. And I could probably play around and tweak this a lot more. I'm not quite happy with the distortion. It could be better, but it's nice the way it is right now, I think. So that gives you an idea of some of the things that you can do to take a preset and change it around and make it your own. At the core of this, it's really still Karplus basic, but I think I've added enough to it that I can, with a straight face, put my name on it as well.